Small advertisement. Everything I just said is described in this book of mine, which was published in 2012. If you are interested with these ideas, come to me, and I will tell you something about this book. It is called The Sleeping Institution and the Federalism in the Modern Russia. Experience of Asia, Africa, and Latin America is accumulated here. And comparative federalism is something that Russia really needs, and we should not compare ourselves with Russia and Germany because we are different. Our group is Young Federation of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Over there we get more for our brains and for enrichment of our view. That seems to be it. I am pleased to pass the floor to our Spanish expert.
Exchange of views during the break, and our distinguished professor says that we will find the two presentations complementary. Now we will see how it works. Добрый день. Oh, good day to everybody. And I would like to open this presentation, first of all, for inviting me to travel here on a tourist visa. The seminar seems to be very interesting, and I think that this is just great that many people have traveled to attend the seminar from all around Russia. So many young people who have traveled to in Spain. It would have been impossible to hold a seminar like this because there would be no money found, and certainly you would not see such an excellent team that would like to travel and attend the seminar, these excellent lectures. So Lena left, but Yuri Sinakusov is here, and I would like to thank you for the invitation. I would like to thank the school on holding a seminar like this. I shall try to tell you right now, as Dr. Zakharov put it, and this we saw certain unintended combination between our two presentations. What he gave us was geographic and historical perspective of federalism across the world, as he focused certainly on what is going on in Russia. And I shall try to, in my presentation, to give an answer to a question that was asked in the topic of our agenda. What does it mean? What should it mean, this living in a federation? I shall not, in my presentation, touch upon issues of what is going on in my country, in Spain. Lena has already said some things about it. I will not speak about the European Union, about this queer model that is getting more and more a federation of countries, who in their turn already are federations. If you will, we can leave it for discussion for the Q&A session, all the things that pertain to Spain or, say, the EU. So, let's start. In reply to the question, what does it mean to live in a federation? To answer this question, it's not simple. You will ask me why. What is so difficult? Where is the difficulty? Where does it lie? At first sight, this question seems to be so sophisticated because the federation is something like a set of certain characteristics. So life within a federation is a certain set of constitutional, legal, and social aspects where the federation lives. But in 2.5 centuries of living within the federation, we still do not know quite exactly what is it. Indeed, what is federalism about? What does it include and what it doesn't preclude? As Dr. Zakharov put it, there are federations who nominally are federations, but are not such in point of fact. Or countries like Spain, where nominally federalism is not announced. We don't have this label of a federative country, but in point of fact, we have a federation. Whatever, I will build my presentation along two lines. First, I shall discuss with you certain answers to questions from the political perspective. I'll try to tackle it from the perspective of sociological, and then I'll share with you certain features of the constitutional features of diverse federation models that exist nowadays in Europe. Sorry. We're speaking about federations which, as Dr. Zakharov told me, are not a model for Russia, but we're nevertheless a model, very much so, for the European construction. The first thing we need to take into consideration is therefore my first answer to the question as to what does it mean to live under a federation and under federalism. The answer would be to live within a federation nowadays. It means to live in conditions where 40% of the population of the world live in. That is, those who live within states who are considered to be federations. The biggest democracies of the world with the largest population are federations. I'm here referring to the United States, to Canada, to South Africa, India, Brazil, and Russia. If we consider Russia, if we still consider Russia a federation, because formally at least you are named the Russian Federation. This is the country's name. So, as Dr. Zakharov put it quite rightly, a large number of countries in the 20th century had become federations to overcome problems of colonialism and so on. So, the first point I wish to raise is that federalism is a successful, victorious model which was introduced after 1787, when it was established in the United States. Thus, federalism is a form of state rule where we have two kinds of rule. First, across the country, federal level for the federation, and secondly, for those parts of the country that are named like states or regions, whatever name you use, provinces, land, as in Germany. In this way, a federative state in this way is distinct from unitary state, where there's only one level of governance. Each level of governance at the federation level and at the regional level, or be they states, or be they republics, be they provinces, whatever name you use, have their own powers, their own power, which they exercise on their own, independently of other members of the federation. And for this political autonomy, the regions have political government, legislative government, and therefore when we speak about legislative government, about the functions, the duties of this government, for this purpose certainly we need a democratic system, because non-democratic regimes, as a rule, cannot afford a true and genuine autonomy for the regions. Dr. Zakharov was quite right in pointing out that such cases as Brazil and Argentina, given their military dictatorships, they indeed continued to use federative model without allowing parts of their federation to become federative model. For example, in Argentina, they had central government, military government, that used regions as political instruments to control their territories. And the military dictatorship in Argentina looked, under this military dictatorship, the federation looked like a fiction. So the second answer to the question about the life within a federation It means that there are other levels of governance. As a rule, they are democratic, and this way it means that you should show tolerance, you should show respect of the rights of those who think in a way that is different from what you think, and of those who use the rights to be different and unlike you, and those who choose their own representatives within the regions. Under federal systems, none of the government bodies enjoys the full truth, and there are other probably ethnicities or nations, like say in the last federative models, for example, like in Bolivia and South America, where the state Bolivia, which is now named a multinational state under its constitution, and it has its own ethnicities that require also that they should enjoy the status of the nation. As Dr. Zakharov put it quite rightly, the development of federalism used different models and different options. This way, many authors in legal and political science who are saying that federalism nowadays, it's not some kind of set model, a certain model. It is rather some political, philosophical idea or a set of certain characteristics, but we don't have any preset model or template for federative state. Thus, in order to describe the states, this model does not work very well. This is, in a way, some kind of a label which we attach to very, very diverse states that are unlike one another, for example, such as Russia, who during a long time, during Soviet rule, was a union of republics at first sight, but it did not have either democracy or federal nature. Nowadays, the Russian Federation enjoys the federation model, but it is not the federation. But otherwise, there are non-federative countries that do not bear this label of being a federation, but in point of fact, they are very much like Spain. They are in reality a federation. And it is quite just Marguerite's picture where it is not really a pipe. You think it is not a pipe, but it turns out to be a pipe. So this sort of thing can happen. And profound decentralization in a political sense, which is coming close in many ways to federalism. For example, the United Kingdom, that is UK, Great Britain, which from the time of devolution has delegated legislative powers to Scotland and Wales. And Northern Ireland, for historical reasons, had these power at that time. Nowadays, Great Britain is not formally a federation, but in point of fact, at least in the case of Scotland, it does have the same power and the same functions like any other state within a federation, like say Bavaria in Germany or any province in Canada. Besides, federalism doesn't say anything to us about other characteristics of the states. We will not know anything about federalism if we speak about presidential or parliamentary model of government. And we do not know whether a federation is a republic or a monarchy. For that matter, there are very few federative monarchies, if you'll notice. As a rule, they're usually republics, with the exception of Belgium, where a federation is monarchic. Federalism doesn't say anything to us about the main fundamental rules. It doesn't say anything about whether there is any uniform level of regulation of the system of basic human rights or fundamental human rights. So quite the opposite. Maybe there are two levels of protection of human rights. One level, say, would be seen at the level of each region or a republic or a province, whatever you name it, like in the United States, where the Constitution of, say, the state of Massachusetts has enshrined its own rights. Plus, on top of that, there are rights at a federal level that are recognized. Therefore, they have the dual system of human rights endorsement. Third answer to the question, a life in a federation can be, well, it could be hard to answer this question because we should seek to understand what does it mean federation in this case. It's important, therefore, to, and you can get an idea on your own, that the main thing is not about a label, about the name, but a reality that of distribution of political government. Are there checks and balances? Are they in place for the central government? The experts and political scientists, as Dr. Zakharov put it, have developed their own indicators of different scales, different kinds of federalism, and it is thought that it helps to find out whether the country is a federation or not, although the country may have the word federation in its name or may not at all in each individual case. So many of federations, in point of fact, have only several indicators or signs of federalism. For this reason, we can make up a certain scale, a certain map of federalism, and some countries shall have more features of federalism compared to others. A reality where federalism helps little to identify the position of the situation. This is what made political scientists to abandoning the constitutional theory, political theory of federalism. They even forgot the name federalism. Instead, they replaced it with in the last 20, 15 and 20 years, they would replace this with a so-called multi-level governance or manageability. Multi-level governance, this is what it sounds in English. In order to speak not about a certain type of state, in the case of federalism, but about a certain reality where many decisions are taken at two or more levels of governance. Two levels of governance at the federal level, so at the federation levels, for example, Bavaria as a land, and the Federative Republic of Germany, or the state of Ontario, say, in Canada, or Punjab and the Indian Federation, or even at three levels of governance, as the case is in Europe, where, for example, Bavaria as a land, Federative Republic of Germany, and the EU. Three instances, three levels of governance that have their own power, which has to do with regulation of the same, say, issues for fundamental human rights, security, safety, trade regulation, and you name it. No doubt, as it was quite justly pointed out, federalism, or the distribution of political government at the territorial level, stands as an obstacle to take collective decisions. But indeed, it can weaken. It is quite the right word to use by Dr. Zakharov. It can really weaken the state because they distribute government among different centers, in terms of territories, I mean, whereas there is a certain level of political decisions, and this is where decisions are more efficient. Say, like in the United States, 51 centers of decision-making, 51 states, or say in Germany, there are 17, that means 16 lands, and the federal level. The level of Federative Republic. Certainly in terms of efficacy, there you can see some failures, where things would not work, some things where we will see overlap of functions or poor efficiency, but in terms of trend, the federation model may be less effective than a centralized model, but we should not fear it and think that is something inconvenient, because fundamental rights are an obstacle for government. When the Constitution guarantees certain rights to people who were, say, detained by the police, the right not to witness against oneself, not to this what we call innocent until proven guilty or benefit of the doubt. All this certainly makes the work of the police less efficient, makes it more difficult. And this is actually for the better, because the fundamental rights imply a certain obstacle or brick for the government, and federalism also implies a certain obstacle for the central government in return for, as democracy implies, participation of the autonomy and its self-rule. Answer number 4, therefore, to the question about what does it mean to live in a federation. Well, certainly to live in a federation, it could be more difficult and less efficient to live within a federation than life in a unitary state. Why? Because processes of decision-making imply a certainly greater number of actors and certainly a greater number of centers of power, which processes can lead to certain points where we require consensus, where we need agreement and consensus between territorial bodies of government. And during our history, Dr. Sakharov reminded us about these passages when we see that the consolidation of federalism in those countries that were mentioned, it was not an easy matter, and it led to, amongst other things, military conflicts. Military conflicts in the United States, which we call the Civil War of 1861-1865, where with the assassination of the president, hundreds of thousands of casualties. In Spain, in my own country, where we had two historical points when transition from federative republic through central monarchy in 1860. In 1870, the republic, it lasted only 9 months, and it led to military putsch. And 1936, as we know, Spain saw the Civil War, which as you well know, which ended and led to the end of the Republican federal model. In this way, institutions sometimes crashed. For example, in Belgium, a federative monarchy that has 3 centers of government that were based upon language, different languages that are spoken by the country. The north would be Flemish, in the south Wallonia speaks French, and in between them is Brussels that speaks both French, Dutch and any other language, any other European language. This is the center of the EU, and these 3 components could not come to terms about how to set up the government during several months, if not years. They didn't have any government at all. They didn't have anybody to rule them. Therefore, through political parties, finally, they came up with a government in unitary countries. This certainly never happens. Therefore, a federation certainly implies certain inconveniences. Answer number 5 to the question. In our talk, federalism implies political autonomy in decision-making by the regions and as we develop our own state policy. This may mean that a certain level of inequality, territorial inequality, a certain region may choose, say, to carry out its own housing policy, whereas another region within the federation may prefer to work with, say, transport and culture policy, and so on and so forth. This raises an important problem of which degree of inequality may be something that the federation system can bear, and what are the mechanisms to unify this federation. So far, this question has not been addressed in my country, in Spain, and this question certainly has not been addressed in several of the most problematic, let me put it this way, federations, such as Belgium. And as time, unfortunately, we are short of time, so I shall just mention several correlations between the concept of federalism and other notions which were discussed by Dr. Zakharov. We could raise it during the discussion. First of all, the relations between federalism and sovereignty. The state, was it sovereign enough to become part of federation or freely withdraw from the federation? Which is the answer, yes or no? I do not know. We have seen civil wars for this reason alone. The correlation between federalism and nationalism. Dr. Zakharov also raised this question. Indeed, federalism implies that it was a certain palliative or antidote to nationalism. The own space of government, of rule, autonomy in each region helped satisfy aspirations for self-government and self-rule in these regions. Therefore, they could somehow calm down these aspirations to secede. It didn't always work with federalism. Dr. Zakharov gave us an example of Quebec in Canada, and if you will, we can look at Catalonia in Spain. And that was not enough to avoid a certain, let me put it this way, disintegration, say, of Yugoslavia into the republics that used to make it. That was not enough. Federalism should be symmetrical and egalitarian, or we can see certain asymmetrical federalism, where some regions or parts of federation may be different from others and may enjoy greater self-rule compared to other regions. This problem is not addressed in full either. In the United States, in theory, each state is equal and enjoys equal rights. For example, California, 30 million of people who live there, enjoys the same number of votes in the Senate, very much like Wyoming, where there are only 800,000 people who live it. Thus, it's compensated in the House of Representatives, where California has 30 or 40 congressmen, whereas Wyoming has only one. In my country, we don't have this symmetry. Instead, we have regions where the functions or levels of financing are higher than, say, what you see in others, or other regions might not have such possibilities at all. Further on, as we contemplate federalism and municipal government, as we speak about federalism, we speak about the correlation between a federation and provinces, states, lands, where usually they have their own legislature and they have some political government. We're not speaking about small and minor municipalities in a country, such as, say, the Netherlands, a unitary state, or a federation. but they have a very high level of municipal decentralization. What is it? Is it a federation or not? Certainly it's not a federation.
Yes, it's not a federation, but in the country there is a greatest level of municipal control, that is decentralization. So that is the way things work in the Netherlands, and they work well. And very briefly, let's discuss the second part of my presentation on the federal models we can see in Europe that more or less inspired to build the all-European construct of the European Union. We can entertain that idea all day through, since I'm going to stay here throughout the day and I'm ready to take your questions on the sidelines. In Europe, there are 4 countries which constitutions proclaim federal model. They are Germany, Austria, Belgium, and Switzerland. Bosnia and Herzegovina, I don't understand how its model works. I think we have a person from Bosnia and Herzegovina here in the room. If the person can explain to us in more details, I would be grateful. And let's see how those federal models work in Europe, the models that largely inspired the establishment of the all-European model. There are 7 characteristics to those models that are genuine characteristics of European federalism. It's not a model which is made piecemeal of various European countries' experiences. It's not the case. And because in Europe you can find some various models, even in Spain. It's not a federal state. So the first characteristic means that all state bodies, agencies, both on the federal and regional levels, they are 16 lands in Germany, provinces in Germany, 17 regions in Spain, in Austria, in Switzerland. They have direct electoral legitimation, and their governments and parliaments are directly elected, and the checks and balances mechanisms are also in place, as well as some other democratic instruments. We cannot say that federal parliament is more democratic than the regional one. It's the direct political legitimacy of bigger or smaller formats for governance. So decentralization in this case is granted by the constitution of the countries. That means that neither level can impact the other. Federation cannot infringe on the authorities of the region, and the opposite. Third characteristic, in the framework of the federation, all bodies, all levels have legislative initiative, so they can draft laws. And in the federal model, you cannot say that there is only one law for all legislative initiatives. All those levels of power are legitimate. In the United States, you can find 51 subjects of legitimacy. In Italy, 21 subjects of legislative power, 20 plus 1 national level. The fourth characteristic, the federal system embodies a number of authorities that are delegated to every level of power, whether it is federal or regional. And normally the Constitution has two lists of authorities. In other words, it's a list. There is a list of authority for the federation and for regions, and the functions or types of authorities can vary. There are some authority that is solely the federal level. That's defense, international relations, civil or criminal codes. And besides, there are some executive types of authority. And regions have to oblige and perform and execute federal laws. So in my country, for instance, healthcare, transport and education are regulated by federal laws, but schools do not belong to the center, to the federation. They belong to the region and are managed by the regions. So the federation in my country does not provide those public services. It's a virtual kind of federation, while the police, judiciary, and they belong to the federal level. Characteristic number 5. Normally those systems are two-chamber system, upper and lower houses, legislative house. In Germany, for instance, it's Bundestag. And the other chamber in Germany represents the interests of the lands, the regions, and members are not elected by the people. They are elected by the government of those respective lands. And they actually are appointed by them to Bundestag. Characteristic number 6. We can think of the conflicts that are inevitable between federal and regional levels, but they are they are considered and ruled by the special judiciary branch. It could be a constitutional court or some other dedicated court. You don't have, you cannot find any single-sided mechanisms for a resolution of those conflicts. It's the judges who rule and decide. And the final characteristic, perhaps we can suggest that there could be some small or bigger conflicts over authority in the region or on the federal level. In Europe, differences cannot be big, while in the United States those differences and conflicts could be bigger. You might recall the discussion on single-sex, same-sex marriages. Heated debate was in California and New Jersey. But on the federal level, we didn't see such a discussion. But in some states, same-sex marriages were prohibited, while in other states they are allowed. And the Supreme Court in 2013 ruled that the federal constitution guarantees same-sex marriages. I'm about to finish. So that's the guarantee and the international protection of those rights. By the way, Russia is one of the 47 members of the Council of Europe, and Russia subordinates to the jurisdiction of the European Court on Human Rights in The Hague, and I think that in Russia there are 3 layers of rights protection, while it's one in Strasbourg, federal and regional. I'm not certain about that, but I can suggest that. In Europe, for instance, in Spain and Belgium, there are three tiers, three layers of the protection of rights. While in the regions they can set forth some rules that may be different from those of the center. So I have listed those 7 characteristics of the federal power, which are approximately the same with all the countries at issue. I would like to wrap up here, and probably during Q&A time we'll think of some other points to discuss. And dear colleagues, I should say that we never came to terms about the professor, what we would talk about. We never discussed that. But what strikes me is the fact that to what extent we were complimentary in our remarks. It's very striking. I suspect we should really make presentations as a tandem. So, dear colleagues, let's move to the discussion. And I think we will allow some 5 questions to be asked, and then Professor and I will decide who will respond to each particular question. Do you agree, Professor? Konstantin from St. Petersburg. I'm Konstantin Krylov from St. Petersburg. The question goes to Professor Beltran de Felipe. As you pointed out in your presentation, one can see a number of regions in Spain which enjoy some authorities, and there are other regions that do not enjoy the same specific authority. So I wonder if there is a trend, such regions as La Coruña, Granada, to win their rights to enjoy same authority. And if it is the trend, does it pose a big problem for the state? Thank you. Question from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Blaženka, floor is yours. Blaženka from Bosnia. My question is as follows. In the future, do you think there will be more countries with federal model of power, or it will be the countries with decentralized model? Dear colleagues, you can ask your questions both in Russian and English. Well, and the moment I said that, more hands were raised. Marina, please. Marina Vyushenko from Khabarovsk. I think my question will go to you, Andrei. In Russia, 7 federal districts were established. I wonder if it doesn't run counter to the principle of the federal state. Eduard, please ask your questions. I'm Eduard Amirov from Bashkortostan Republic. My question goes to you, Andrei, too. An attempt to set up a fronda. Was it an attempt to build a federal state in Russia at the end of the 1990s, early 2000? Timur, your question, please. Thank you. I would like to ask the situation in Spain. Even recently, we saw some terrorist attacks there, and the attacks that were conducted by a terrorist organization, but then some consensus was reached. So the situation when Spain was gradually drifting to the federal situation, was it the effect of that? One more question. I'm Julia Krivonosov from St. Petersburg. My question goes to Andrei too. You emphasize that the party system plays a great role for federalism to exist. The ban on regional parties, is it the mandatory norm for federalism to exist? Thank you, dear colleagues. First, we will answer your questions and then we will move on. Professor, could you start, please? I would like to thank the two persons who asked questions in Spain. It's a great language, and I feel some inferiority because I cannot reciprocate in Russian. Well, speaking of authority, I'll be very brief. In Spain, there are 17 regions which enjoy a very high level of authority. They have legislative authority, education, transport authority. And the mid-level of self-governance in Spain can be comparable with that of the federal system. Andalusia, the Canary Islands, they have level of authorities comparable with those of Bayern, Handel-Hessen, of Germany. But there are two regions in Spain which has this taxation system that are exclusive. That's the Navarra province and the Basque province, and it results in the fact that those regions are richer and cannot be explained rationally. So in Spain, the only federal budget allocates funds to 15 regions, meaning that the citizens of those 15 regions pay their taxes directly to the budget, while the federal budget distributes the funds to the other region, but federal budget is not. In other regions, people pay to the regional budgets, and then the regions allocate some funds to the center. Again, there cannot be rationally explained. That's history, and there is asymmetry with the regions. And the Catalonia enjoys some other authority that other regions do not have. It's a small asymmetry, but it's quite visible, because the Catalonia is now demanding that its taxation system is the same as in the Basque province. Responding to the question from Bosnia and Herzegovina about the future of federalism, I don't know really what to say. On the one hand, federalism, as was pointed out in our tandem presentation with Andrei, well, the role of federalism has been growing, but in order to meet some local requirements, which are decolonization and transition from dictatorships in Europe, transition from Nazis regime, led to the establishment of the Federal Republic of Germany, which was federal. Really, same things happened to Italy. They have a quasi-federal system of regional autonomy, and same things happened in Spain following the fall of the Franco dictatorship. But in Greece and in Portugal, under the same circumstances, no federal models were established. So you can see that there can be demand, or there can be no demand in federalism. So it depends on each individual country, each individual situation. We made a point that federation is not always a synonym to democracy. So I think that the trend is that federalism has some mechanisms for improvement, so it can mature in many countries, but again, it depends on the choice of each country. And I'm talking about that based on the previous experience. Okay, I will also start with Blashenko's question. I would emphasize two things here. On the one hand, we can say that federations have become so multiple because the colonial empires had fallen. And the colonial empire is a very convenient way to reformat imperial space into democracy. So that's the reason why there are so many federations on the ruins of colonial powers. Now, colonial powers are very few and they are very small. And even if they fall, they will not produce such rich harvest of federations. The other point is that it's the epoch of globalization now, and I can suspect that globalization requires several types of responses on the part of modern countries. And contrary to our idea, it requires not uniformity, but it requires such a situation that various countries would respond in their own way under the same circumstances. And a strive for regional system can be explained by that, and it will contribute to the establishment of federal or quasi-federal formats. So perhaps we can see some new federations, although it's very closely intertwined with some even greater turmoils that the planet can witness in the 21st century. And it's hard to answer that question now when it looks like the world has gone crazy. As for the federal districts, my answer will be very simple. That's a construct that is not stipulated by the Constitution. Nothing to discuss, no grounds. In 1990s, I would refer to that time as a period when we really saw some signs of federalism in the country. You can argue that those signs were ugly, but if you refer to the ability to bargain between federal and regional authorities as the main criteria, well, we saw that bargaining. It was also ugly. It was not good, and the center was too weak, but bargaining policies were very clearly seen in those times. And finally, party system and regional parties. I would answer to that question by saying that it's true that the lack of regional parties in Russia, which are perceived as the threat to the integrity of the country, in terms of federal constitution, in terms of the federal constitution, those approaches are not justified. We have a big country. Why not? I wonder why Kaliningrad and Vladivostok should think always along the same lines, and they are to be represented by the same parties. But we understand why that system emerged. That's one of the effects of the establishment of the vertical system of power. If things will not go that tough, and if there will be a relaxation of political tension, perhaps we will see some more regional parties. I think we can get some more questions. Speaking of the question of regional parties, I would really mention a paradoxical situation. In the United States, there is the country of freedom and diversity, but there are no regional parties. There are only 3 federal level parties. There were attempts to establish another party by Ross Perot in 1992, who helped Bush, the elder, lose the elections. But there are no regional parties. In Germany, for instance, it's the same. In Bavaria, there is a small Christian social party, but there are no major regional parties that would contribute to better stability. But there are some other federal model with or featuring regional parties, as what Andrei pointed out. It's Canada and Quebec, or in the UK. In Scotland, there is a regional party that secured the opportunity to carry out a referendum. And in some countries, regional parties have a great weight, like in France, but and in the electoral system, sometimes parties that win federal elections do not have enough members in the legislature, and they need support of small regional parties. So that situation is quite odd. And I would like also to revisit the question about the terrorism and ETA organization. I don't think that there is any linkage between the terrorism in the Basque country and federalism. In other words, the fact that that organization stopped killing people does not mean that they are satisfied now with more self-governance. In Northern Ireland, and was also the era terrorist organization, and peace was established not because they had received more authority. Those processes are not correlated, and peace in the Basque country and in Northern Ireland lasts because there is conventional wisdom and understanding on the part of the citizens of the Basque country and Northern Ireland that vulnerable is to be stopped. I'm Neil Homer from Bashkortostan. Initially, in the Russian Federation, we saw two principles: asymmetry and national territories principle. The principle of asymmetry was under pressure. The head of the Bashkortostan Republic, who was quite weak, and the parliament institution was losing its importance, who just started copying federal acts, and local governance bodies were also losing importance, including municipal authorities and local authorities. We made our calculation, and we saw that there are some 30 supervising and oversight bodies of the federal center who exert a lot of pressure on our municipal powers and authorities. So my question is if we are going to see any attempt to build a federation based on the territorial principle, and if it is, or if we are going to see it, what implications it will bring about. I'm from St. Petersburg, and I would like to ask a question about the situation in Catalonia and the United Kingdom. There are two countries in the European Union where some regions enjoy and pursue the ideas of autonomy. So my question is, why is it happening? What makes the situation so acute? Are there any political, economic factors to contribute to that? Perhaps it's because of the economic crisis, or perhaps some historical tradition lead the two regions to autonomy. So it's Catalonia, and the last question will be asked by Dragan, and we will close the line. I'm from the Academy of Political Development. I'm Dragan Mitievich. What do you think of the future of the Spanish state following some amendments in the Constitution? and following based on the nationalism in Catalonia in the Basque Country. Will it be more federal? Will there be more autonomy to those regions? Will it be a weakened regime or a weakened federation without Catalonia? Will it secede? What will happen after October 11, after referendum in Catalonia? And with ongoing economic crisis, what will happen to the economic crisis? Sorry, colleagues, we cannot take any more questions, and we'll try to be very brief in answering our questions. With your permission, I will start, because there are fewer questions addressed to me. As for the territorial principle federation, perhaps there will be some attempts to put it into doubt, but I wouldn't recommend you pursue such a policy. And the fact that the Russian Federation was based on the territorial principle is the result of the right of the nations for self-determination, which is stipulated in many international documents, and nobody is going to argue with that. You cannot take away authority that were delegated at some point to a territory, and I cannot imagine a political force in the country that would dare doing that. You might have noticed that the expansion of regions process was stopped, and it was done just because the reason I had mentioned. Economic advantages of the mergers would be leveraged by political expenses, and I think our leaders understand that, but I can only guess what they think about that. Well, just 1 minute for two questions. Hard situation questions are quite complex. They concern the future, they concern the separatism in Catalonia. Perhaps if you're really interested, we can continue on the sidelines. Speaking of the situation in Catalonia and Scotland, I am short of information of Scotland. I don't think I can explain much to you about Scotland. But I think that the entire process in Scotland was quite democratic and open, transparent, as compared with Catalonia. In Catalonia, to explain where those sentiments come from and why they strive for independence, and because of that, the referendum will be held on October 11th. You know, for 2 or 3 centuries, Catalonia has been striving for autonomy. In the 19th century, it was suppressed by monarchy. In the 20th century, it was suppressed by Franco. Both in 19th and 20th century, there were civil wars because Basques and Catalonians wanted to be independent. And even during Franco regime, the languages of Catalonia and the Basque country, their languages were prohibited. So for 2 centuries in a row, any attempts for self-governance were suppressed. And since democracy was established and a lot of autonomy was delegated, we thought that the problem was resolved. Catalonia, you wanted self-governance, okay, you have it. And for 30 years we saw, or we thought that autonomy and self-governance will be established.
But for some reasons which can hardly be explained in a logical way, such as the nationalism, mythology, political dreams, not many people in Spain share these attitudes, and I don't think that there's much future for the advancement along this path, because they're within the EU as all of Spain. So I do not believe there are any grounds for the deepening separatism and for a referendum So, if the decision is, even it is positive, for Catalonia to become a state in itself, this is within the EU. This is totally ruled out. So, no logical deliberation is possible for the future years. With respect to the future of Spain as a country, I do not readily believe that there will be any problem. We have a consolidated statehood. Indeed, we're going through a major crisis, but many other countries go through a crisis, Greece, Italy. And some countries have defaulted on their payments, and the EU had to come to help, like in the cases of Greece and Ireland, Malta. No, sorry, not Malta, but in any way, certainly Greece and Ireland. I do not foresee any particular problems for Spain. I may be a bit optimistic, but we can talk about this later if you wish during the break. If I may, just a couple of words and say that as distinct from Mr. Beltran de Felipe, I think that at least 3 countries of the European Union will meet very serious challenges, euro challenges, the United Kingdom and Italy, countries which will have great secessionist movements so I think that a lot would depend if we start moving out from the umbra of the economic crisis. But still, I would like to be an optimist. Colleagues, I hope this has been an interesting session. Thank you very much for being with us. We'll break for 25 minutes.